event, Rise Up. It's a series where we're talking with Black deaf business owners and how they're surviving the pandemic. Before we get into the program for today, we want to go a little bit into sharing some things about accessibility. First, it's best to view this program through a desktop. If you're using a mobile device, that's okay, but you may have some limitation. You can go ahead and make sure that your sound is enabled. We do have voice interpreters available with us today. There are also closed captions that are available. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and select CC for that. And if there are any technical difficulties, you can reach out to us in the chat about that. Some quick things about how to use the Zoom platform. You'll notice that when we begin sharing our PowerPoint, there are 2 white lines that will appear. If you hover over that, you can adjust the sizing of the videos and the PowerPoint. If you would like to ask us any questions, feel free to use the Q&A box. You can locate that at the bottom of the screen. Also, if you're struggling with any technical issues, you can use the chat box to communicate with our tech team, and they'll go ahead and respond to you there. Also, if you have any direct questions for our host or for our guest, you can use the Q&A feature to ask those questions. And we're hoping that people can go ahead and use the upvote feature that's available there to send your question to the top if others have the same question. If you need tech support, you can use the chat box to direct all of your tech-related questions. Now we'd like to recognize our sponsor, the Wells Fargo Foundation, for helping support CSD's learning for many years and having these types of events. We want to thank them for their ongoing partnership. We also want to acknowledge Interpreter Now for providing interpreters for this event. They are an interpreting agency based in California who provide top-notch interpreters. And we wanted to be sure that this was in a space where everyone could be included and participate. And so we want to thank them for helping make that accommodation possible. Next slide, please. For those who are meeting me for the first time, my name is Jazzy Jones. I work for the CSD Learning Center, CSD Learns. A lot of my work for CSD Learns, it really feels like 24/7 job. I'm always preaching about Black wealth, how to advocate and support those businesses, Black-owned businesses. And you saw that my handle, if you want to follow me on social media, is @JazzyJones. Now I'm going to go into a bit of a recap of what we discussed last week during our CSD Learn session. We had 3 guests with us. All were Black business owners, Black female business owners. This one had a clothing shop. Dejanay Ross, DJ. She is a flower shop and herbalist. And then our last panelist was Rosetta Stevenson. And Rosetta Steven owns a bakery. And so the 3 panelists that we had, they shared a lot of information and shared just their story about their business. And so that was really neat. And you could see some of the quotes that we pulled from our meeting with them up on the slide now. So one interesting fact that I learned from them is that the impact from the pandemic has actually been positive for them. And they've seen an increase in revenue and opportunity during the pandemic. So that was really interesting. And I know that a lot of businesses are facing challenges, and there are some delays as far as how the logistics supply chain is affected. but the demand for their products has skyrocketed. And so that was something they shared. And that was new to me, that they actually had a positive impact from the COVID pandemic. However, while that was true for their businesses, we do have to recognize the facts that every day of last year, there were just over 1,800 new businesses started by women. Now, that was last year. That's incredible. The entrepreneurship of Black women business owners was the fastest growing group of last year when we look at entrepreneurships on the whole. However, when we look at the impact of COVID, they have been the group that's received the least amount of support in order to continue growth at those numbers that we saw last year. Next slide. And so that was a recap from what we had last week with our three panelists. So I really learned a lot. I hope you all did too, and that you all enjoyed it. So we're going to continue with this week's show and invite two more guests that we have with us today. I'm really excited to introduce them. You can see them here on this slide. So last week we focused on the retail business sides of things. The business owners that we invited, they had product that they sold, and so they were in the retail space. Today we're shifting a bit, and we have with us Andrea Saunier. She is a service-based business. Her business is essentially focuses on education for liberation, and she will share a little bit more about what she does in that space. And then we have Anton Abraham. He goes by Ant. He is a DJ, a live DJ. And so he'll be joining us soon as well with Andrea. So today's Lunch and Learn is going to focus on how the COVID pandemic has affected their businesses. What challenges have they faced? What resources have they been able to benefit from and have access to? And so I'm really excited to learn more kind of tips and advice from the two of them today. And now, without further ado, I invite Andrea and Ant to join me on screen for today's Lunch and Learn. Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm glad that you both could join us today. And like I said, I don't want to delay any further, so let's just jump right into the conversation. So first things first, if you two could just introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your background, about your business, maybe things that we haven't heard about your business before, if you'd like to share a little bit about that now. And we'll start with Andrea. Hi, yes, it's an honor to be here. I appreciate being a part of the conversation around Black wealth. And I've been watching and learning a lot myself with your other events in the series. I just launched last August, so August of 2020, a new project in my business called Critical Consciousness School. And so I call it CC School. And CC School provides year-long it's a year-long series, about 10 months, and we have different lessons that we provide to people about how to approach their deaf education, the curriculum within deaf education, and the like. And so really we want it to be a space where it can be healing for our deaf students, really self-transformative, and have that accountability piece in there as well within our education system that can cause so much trauma and harm to especially Black and Brown students. We want to make sure that our school systems, our educational systems are minimizing the harm that they're doing to these Black and Brown students and other students as well, so that our future generations can thrive and really meet their full potential. And so we really look internally to figure out how we can achieve that full liberation and potential for our students and for ourselves.
Hello, hello, everyone. Well, my full name is Anton Abraham, but I go by DJ Hear No Evil. I'm from New York. I live close to New York City. And so you can see back here my whole DJ setup and my hats in the background. You got all that going on. All right. So I started DJing when I was around 13 or 14, and I was taught by my father. And he really showed me the ropes and showed me about music. And it was my uncle was also involved in that as well. And it's a funny thing that my father and my uncle are best friends, and it so happens that my cousin, my uncle's son, and I are best friends. So the four of us really had a really strong bond. And so that was something that really inspired me to look up to them. Is when my father passed away, my best friend passed away, I decided to keep it going. I didn't want to give up. And so the purpose of this DJing business is to try to impact the world that maybe people like us, maybe deaf folks or disabled folks, that didn't have access to. And so that's what I'm, and that we can, and that it's, that we can do anything that we put our minds to, and that to not doubt ourselves and that we can overcome those obstacles. But more importantly, is that we have to go do it with passion. The money's going to come anyway, but of course, the passion is what keeps it going. So my business isn't just DJing. I want it to be more than just that. And you can see Jazzy gave some examples for the next step of my businesses. And I do have my live streams and that, but right now what I'm doing is DJing. I'm also an influencer, a motivational speaker as well. And I'm hoping to be involved in some type of musical directing later. So there's a lot of things going on in the future for me, and I look forward to it. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Yes, I like that. That's awesome. And so the next question, it's a little bit off script. I'm going to go a little bit off script, but I'm excited to see your answers. And so I've really got a lot of questions, but I'll start with this one. But before I do that, I want to ask you all, what has the pandemic's effect been on your businesses? I know for you, Andrea, it's interesting because you said that your business launched last August. And so you really established your business amidst the pandemic. And so I'm curious what that experience was like for you. Yes, I really appreciate that question. So I established the business really because it had a lot to do with the pandemic, but I actually wanted to start it in March. And so when I first announced it to the world, to the public, I said, we're going to be, I had planned to start CC School and launch it 2 weeks after I had announced it, which was initially in March. But because of COVID, all of my plans to film, all the courses that I had planned, where I was going to go film those courses were shut down due to the pandemic. And so there was a delay with filming, whether because I couldn't get access to the building or what have you. And so I did run into obstacles as far as finding an adequate space where I live. And I'm in a very small apartment and trying to figure out how I was still going to film those modules. And so honestly, after the closure that occurred in March due to the pandemic back in 2020, and then we saw the police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and how that really impacted the community. And, me as well as an individual, I was extremely triggered. It was a traumatizing experience. And I, at the time, was in Gallaudet University as a PhD student. And seeing all of the police brutality that was occurring along with everything else was really the last straw for me. I'm trying to think, that was around summer of last year in July where I decided to take a leave of absence from my studies at Gallaudet University. That was back in July of 2020. And I had seen that all of the work that I had done over the many years was put on hold. And instead of trying to wait for the university, to rectify the trauma that it was causing, that I was bearing witness to and experiencing, I decided all of the work that I had invested myself in within the past 7 years, I was just going to go ahead and do it for me and start this business in the way that I felt would best address students' needs and really be a healing opportunity for students in deaf education and for educators as well. All of my personal experience, what I had been witnessing, all of that, you know, just everything I invested into the development of my curriculum. And I partnered with different deaf institutions, got feedback from students. And I feel like I'm a bit off the point. So let me get back to it. So mid-August, what I thought would help, unfortunately, people were finally willing to look deep inside themselves to figure out how their behavior was aligning, or rather not aligning, with their core values. And so unfortunately that happened only recently, when people started to really look deep within themselves. And the Black Lives Matter movement had a part in that. And so that kind of spark that we saw take over the nation really helps. It was the perfect timing for me and my business to really launch. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, it's talking about like the stars aligning. Absolutely. It was kind of like the perfect time with everything that was happening nationally, and then what your business focuses on, and that self-reflection and self-examination. Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, we were a 20 person school, and we were facing a lot of obstacles. A lot of folks didn't want to work with us. And so it was trying, absolutely. But, I don't want to take over all the time. I'll let Aunt respond. Um, so, yeah. And Jazzy's saying, yes, Aunt. So, same question for you. How has the COVID pandemic really affected your business? As a DJ and a live music producer, that's really a business that requires physical, interaction when you go to shows and you have that kind of close contact with people. So, how have you been able to shift the model of your business so that you can keep up and running during this pandemic that we're seeing?
Yeah, it's been very tough for sure. And there's been a national impact on business. And it's hit every business, really. So for me personally, before I was doing, live all the time or on stage or, doing what I have to do. And so when the pandemic hit, it was similar to what Andrea said. How do I change my business plan? Because 2020 was supposed to be my year. I was there, I was ready to release some stuff, and unfortunately, I had to put all those new things I was ready to release on hold. And I had to make a shift around to virtual. I did a few things online, maybe using Facebook Live or Zoom, or I could send music through sound mix, through the internet streaming services that way. And so that was how I tried to continue the process, to keep the connection, to keep going, because I didn't want to give up. And so I did. So instead of giving up, I took a short step back just to reevaluate, because I had to figure out how, because with the pandemic hitting, I had to figure out, how can I better myself, and how can I support Black Lives Matter, and not just Black folks, but other races as well, because that's more important to me than DJing. So I was trying to figure out how I could be an advocate, how I could better provide for my community, and then I was able to go back to my DJ business and figure out ways to keep it going. And one of the ways I did keep it going was putting my music online, or what, from time to time, doing different releases. I wasn't doing it every week. I wish that I could have kept going every week, but that's just not something that was able to happen. So I'm hoping that sometime this year I'll be able to do better. And but we'll see what happens.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. I hope that after folks are able to get vaccinated, it becomes a more safe environment where we're able to gather and
Yeah, for
interact
sure.
again. And so I believe you all may have actually already touched on this, but maybe you want to go a bit deeper into it. What were some of the challenges, the obstacles that you faced as a business owner during this pandemic? And it can be something, during the pandemic that you face, or maybe even just more generally, what things have you experienced as far as obstacles in starting your business? Maybe Andrea, you want to start? Yeah, like I said, so my business is relatively new. We just launched, and I decided to just recognize my own worth and run with it. I had a background in this work for many years, and I was used to working for free. I was in the education system, and I learned the hard way that it's easy to burn out in this field when you're investing so much of your time and energy and passion into other folks' visions and goals and systems. And so I kind of had to take a step back and look at the environment that I was in and realize that it was causing a toll on me. And that if I wanted, this for my life, if I wanted to achieve a specific goal for my life, then I just had to get up and do it myself and invest in myself. So I had partnered with the various organizations, and like when we talk about budget, for example, and we talk about our mental, physical, emotional investment. So all of that, I had given all of that type of energy to other organizations. But when we look at budget, people, I'll say like people who were doing this work, they were undercharging. I was undercharging for my services. And so that was a difficult conversation I had to have with myself as far as how to fairly price my work and do equal pay for equal work, essentially. And so the financial part of it was an obstacle for me, but I thought it was important to, really get through that. I had to recognize my worth, what I was bringing to the table, and set a fair price, and so that I could effectively budget for my future endeavors with the business. I'm still learning. I'm still going through it, especially within the deaf community when we look at how they're impacted by financial inequities. And so that's something that I struggle with still, but I am learning how to, just best use what I have, look at the resources that are available to me and use them to the so that I can be as effective as I can be with what I have. Yeah, no, I totally get that. When we look at being a woman, we're typically paid less. Even though we have qualifications, we're typically underpaid for the qualifications and credentials that we have. A lot of the work that we do requires a lot of emotional investment, and it's very difficult when you want you want to contribute your talent and your skill, your years of experience. You're a researcher, and to do all of that and not get paid equitably is something that is definitely frustrating. And for me, I feel that way as well, as far as making sure that I'm receiving fair pay for fair work.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you have said, and that's been a challenge for me as well. The challenge of charging my worth. And I think about it and I say I provide all of these things, and I look at the perspectives of my work, and I end up charging less than what I really should. And I have lowered the cost a little bit, and it's like, how do I match my needs and what, because I need to make a living. I need to eat, right? I need to stay alive. And so how do I match,
Yeah,
my
exactly.
needs along
Exactly.
with like what folks are expecting me to charge? It's a balance there. But I'm always saying, charge what you worth. And because the pandemic is temporary. We can't allow people to take advantage of your services just because it's during a pandemic. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with
And
that.
so, before I had, like a minimum that I would charge or whatever. And now it's better to charge what you're worth. And so when I'm faced with that, do I decide, when I feel like the budget is low, and it's like, and there are multiple ways in which I can earn money. And so I'm doing research. I can earn money at DJing, right? So I look at other DJs and see how much they're charging. Or I look at Facebook Live DJs and you'll see that they put their Cash App or their Venmo handles on there. So I realize, okay, that's another revenue stream as well. And it's different. But I don't want it to make it seem like I'm greedy or that it's all about the money, give me money, give me money. And but you do, you get what you get, and so it's important to charge your worth. That's
That
very
part.
important in this process.
Yep. I saw a quote online that says, what did it say? It said, charge your worth and then add tax. Yes, the black tax. Exactly, exactly. And when we talk about people wanting access to your services, they're just going to have to find the money, period, in the discussion. Like as Andrea said, you've been in this business for years. You have the experience, you have the knowledge. And so if folks want access to that knowledge and that breadth and depth of experience, they're going to have to pay for it. And running a business is hard. You're making decisions every day, and so there's a cost to benefiting from that as a consumer. And it's just like Ann said, we all have to eat to survive. When we talk about quality of life, that requires money. And when we talk about being able to take advantage of things like the PPP loan that was out and other financial resources that were supposed to help businesses maintain, be able to stay afloat during this pandemic, I'm wondering, what are you all doing instead of, what are some other alternative approaches that you guys have taken to maintaining your business? Like, Aunt, you mentioned Cash App. Are there other ways that you guys are kind of adding different methods to approaching your business?
So yeah, I have to really invest my own money in those things myself. I haven't taken advantage of the PPE or things like that. And so one thing I wrote my proposal to see if I can get some type of grant for my business. That's one avenue I've taken. And so I can move forward with what I have to do to maintain my business, and so I can release the things that I need to release that I was hoping to release back in 2020. That's one avenue I've taken. But the problem right now, yeah, and I guess that's the main challenge right now.
Yeah, so I actually haven't researched any of the loans that are available to the public, like the PPP or anything else. My business was just funded straight from my pocket. Like I said, I've been in this business for a long time, and so I've hosted a variety of online courses and uh, those other opportunities that I've been able to take advantage of and earn an income in those ways. I've used that to just save up over the years and invest that into the business that I launched last year. And so it's just been 7 years of my own money, investment in my own education to make this business happen. And thankfully, I have the support to be able to do that. I was able to, learn along the way how to take my own skills and talents and turn that into an investment that I could use for my business. I'm also pregnant with my first child.
Congratulations.
Yeah, my partner uh, and myself, so we do have some money left over for family. And so the business, we have to balance the expenses and the financial output toward the business and then versus towards our family, because we have a baby on the way. But when you talk about, hiring people and creating a staff, it's not something that can be run by just one person. You need a team to maintain a business um, that's as heavy as this one. And so when you're running a business with employees, absolutely, I want to shift from just paying everything out of pocket into looking more into those grants and loans and other things. And something that I shared earlier this month in the CSD Lunch and Learn series is that when we talk about starting a business, really comparing white folks starting a business versus Black people starting a business, who has the privilege of access to certain types of loans, who's being approved for loans, who has family with other resources, where white business owners may be tapping into just generational wealth that we don't have as Black people. And so really looking at the process of how we're financing businesses um, is definitely different. And even talking about financial literacy, how we learn about money, how we learn about running a business, all of that is something that we're just spending our own time and money to do. And it's just motivated by our own passion to achieve these huge goals. So I congratulate both of you absolutely for you really, starting, Andrea, in the middle of this pandemic and launching your business, launching this thing that it's like an accumulation of all the hard work you've taken over the last 7 years.
Yeah, most definitely, for sure, most definitely.
All right, and I'm checking time. Looks like we are still good on time. And so now, you all have mentioned, Andrea, you mentioned financing the business out of your own pocket. So a follow-up question to that, if you were to receive a large grant of money, say $10,000, somebody granted you, what would you do with it?
Yeah, $10,000 is a lot of money to me. What would I do at $10,000? All right. Of course, I have to invest that, so I could, so that because when you invest it, you get more
Absolutely.
back. So for example, when I look at my vision, if I want to take that money and donate it to charity, I believe that if you give money to the right place, you give good money, that money comes back to you in some other way. So if I put that money maybe to invest within my business or something along those lines, and some powerful things can happen with that. And so that's my goal if you just keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah. I invested in people. Like I mentioned, I was a business owner worker. I was the sole person in my company for a while. And when I was working with people, it seemed like, I was working with other institutions who were trying to figure out how they could really have transformative spaces within their admin and staff team within the deaf education space. And so they had the heart, they had the motivation and the will where they wanted to understand how to better lead within their communities. And they just needed the skill development to make sure that their practices were aligning with those core values. And so right now, with everyone isolated, everybody is kind of just working within their own organizations and siloed in that manner. Then the programs and curriculum that I set up are really an opportunity where it could be more community focused. It could be a community wide discussion where we're looking at practices that are occurring across states rather than just within our own organizations. And I think it's great now that this work is not just a me thing, but really the community has taken ownership. And it's, something that I've spent a lot of days thinking about and working on. And like I said, just a lot of financial, emotional, physical investment. And now I'm able to help spread that knowledge to folks across the nation, and so that they can better their own communities where they serve.
Yeah, and I agree. I want to add something to what Andrea just said. Motivating people to do something, that's something, just for example, paying that money. Yeah, you can pay that money to help, but how do you really, really help someone when you look at from the perspective of what you're passionate about? Before, you have that saying, money comes and goes. And then if you give money, and their job ends, maybe they can invest that money into their family or to their business or something. That's whatever it may be. That's a way that you can help people. And it's really important that we're a team, that we help each other. I've had several people support me, when things were tough. And that's what I want to do. I want to give back, pay it forward so I can help grow not only my own business, but other, Black deaf owned businesses as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I'll ask this final question for all of you watching in the audience. If you have any questions for our two panelists, Andrea or DJ Hear No Evil, please feel free to go ahead and ask those questions. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them. I do have one more question to ask. And it is, if this pandemic continues, how do you expect that to impact your ongoing plans for your business? So you all just, Andrea, you just mentioned that you're currently pregnant. And so, 6 months from now, when you have a beautiful bundle of joy, what are your, what do you see your plans for the remainder of the year with, having a new baby and having a new business and still being in a pandemic? Yeah. Did you want to respond first, Aunt?
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. All right. So yeah, remember how I mentioned that the plan was to work and film everything in March, but then we had the shutdowns that occurred due to COVID. And so my bedroom became my workspace as well. I was teaching in the space. I was doing everything, sleeping, teaching, filming, all in my bedroom. So then November came around and my partner and I decided to move into a bigger apartment, at least 2 bedrooms, so we could have, an office, quote unquote, an office rather than just sleeping in my bedroom and also filming. It's always like, yes, let's do it. But then we couldn't find an apartment. And so, now we have to, a month later, we realized that when we did find the apartment, a month later, we realized that I was pregnant. And so that office that we were so excited about was going to become a nursery. Um, but really, I think what's important is we're trying to buy a home as soon as possible. So that is in the works. We're looking out for that. Um, we're continuing to, I'm continuing to film my videos for the lessons that are a part of my curriculum. And I still quite haven't figured everything out. It's still a challenge, but I'm going with the flow. Yeah, yeah, you just got to take it day by day. And did you want to respond?
Yeah, as for me, I'm always trying to think 6 months ahead of time and have a 6 month plan. And what's worked for me, so I have a 3 month, 6 month, and ultimately 12 months from there. And so, so far we're already, 3 months through this. 2020 was 3 months through we hit the pandemic. So when I was trying to get my documentary and I had everything done and I was ready to release it last year, I couldn't because of the resources were dried up due to the pandemic. So now I'm trying to see if I can release it this year. So I'm going to sit down and watch, but also figure out how I can find sponsors for myself to help my business grow. So that's one thing. So that's an example of one thing I'm trying to release, the documentary. And again, as I said before, everything's occurring in these virtual spaces. So I'm trying to figure out how I can put the same energy that I put live and have that translate into the virtual space. And that's a really big challenge. Because I'm a
Yeah,
DJ, being around people gives me the energy. I'm just very extroverted. I read off the
right.
vibes and all that stuff. And so being online when I'm at home, I don't have that same feed of energy. So I'm trying to figure out some ways that I can motivate myself in the same way. And the thing is, when it comes to watching, you never know who's
Mm-hmm.
watching when it's
Yep.
virtual. So, I mean, like, Lord knows if it could be who's behind the scenes. It could be the Pope, it could be just a regular person. I have no idea. So how do I keep myself motivated? I have to do it somehow. And I am hoping that, in the future we'll get back to being, in person. And hopefully at that point the resources will be better.
Yeah, we can only think positively. Oh, did you want to add, Andrea? Yeah, yeah. No, but did you want to ask another question? Okay, well, yeah, I just want to add to something that Ant just said. When you talk about the energy of live versus a virtual experience, I mean, there's a lot of work that's required in maintaining that, the vibe and the energy that you're able to have through physical connection in person is different. And then when you're talking about things like classism and racism and other systemic oppressions, um, it's tough to have those types of conversations and dialogues through a virtual space. You don't have the same connection as easily as you could if you were sharing a location. And so it really becomes a part of that kind of creative process where you recognize this disparity between what is happening on an organizational level and what schools are doing. And then how you have conversations about that in a virtual space. Am I just going to have staff and administration just watch me give a lecture, give a presentation? That's really not the point of really having that self-examination. And so you have the breakout rooms that help um, re re reintroduce that kind of uh, interactive experience that we have in a live setting. And so actually have on my schedule to do a couple of interviews about culture within different organizations and how they're doing the work. So even though we're online and we're using various technologies, we can still accomplish those goals. I just have to force myself to say something sometimes when we're on a virtual platform versus in person. Sometimes it's easier to converse and be involved. And when you're on a computer, it's just easy. It's more easy to disengage. And so, it just becomes part of reading the audience and understanding, where the vibe is at any given moment.
Yeah, that's right. It's all about, like relationships. And I have found that, people have, contacted me to be like a virtual DJ or motivational speaker. And I did, talk with that person online, of course. And I did, the idea of like, when to meet at Starbucks or, just a space location or a safe location, obviously socially distant at that, and I did meet with that person and the energy was much different. It was a huge
Yeah, the
difference.
energy is so different.
You can understand their feeling, their vibe. It just feels like a stronger connection when you meet offline.
Uh-huh.
And so I did, take the initiative and go ahead and say, a few times, not all the time, I don't always do it, but a few times I've taken the initiative to say, let's try and move this offline so I can try and build a better relationship with that person. And that's a better way to keep myself in the loop and how things are going. And so that is something that I've done.
Yeah, and you two brought up a good point when you talk about how you're able to relate to people in a virtual world. It's definitely not lost on me how I am connecting with the both of you right now as like virtual friends. And
And as you're saying,
so,
yes, exactly.
yeah, yeah. And I had no idea about you, Andrea, about your school and the history and the background behind it. And so I'm learning a lot of it online now. And so I'm wondering, and when you talk about getting on Facebook Live and just playing your music or, doing whatever it is that you do, just having the spark to do that. Because like you said, you don't even know who's watching this now. And so sometimes you got to just kind of get
Right,
up
right.
and yeah, sometimes you just got to get up and put something on and hope that the audience is out there and just keep shining bright and keep doing your thing and keep it pushing because it's just a weird space that we're in right now. And when we look at the number of Black deaf businesses, I mean, it's
Right,
it's
exactly.
small, and so we really have to continue to support each other and appreciate the businesses that we do have, continue to uplift those who are putting in the time and the effort to make their dreams come true. And I'm doing my own thing. I'm not ready yet to release it and launch it yet, but I'm getting there. And so with that, I'll say, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and experiences about how you all are navigating this pandemic. And so things must be all right as far as energy, because we still have a good number of folks here in the audience in the Zoom room. So energy must be good, vibe must be good. You all have shared a lot with us this afternoon, and so we appreciate that. And we just want to wrap up with maybe if you could share some tips or advice to the audience members who are watching this now, whether live or later. What are some things they should think about before they launch their business? Or maybe they already have a business established and they just need some tips on, how to keep going and how to sustain their endeavors. You have any tips you could share with us? Maybe we'll start with Ant.
Okay, all right. I feel like I'm always taking up space, but that's okay as long as Andrew's okay with it.
No, you're good. You're good.
All right, so my advice to Black deaf business owners during the pandemic really is to figure out how you're going to establish your business. And it's a great time to set up your network. Start small. It will grow. And a lot of things really depend on who you know. Before, back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, it was about who you know, and so you have to figure out how to connect with that person. And you connect with one person and they lead you to another person that maybe fits better in your network.
Mm-hmm.
And they may say, oh, this is someone that actually knows about your industry, and that can lead you to more knowledge that way. So I've learned a lot through trial and tribulation. And I've had to really be resilient. And it takes courage. It really does. And I heard this word that said, or this phrase that said, you fall down 10 times and get up 9, or something like that. The idea that you have to get up more times than you've fallen down. That's the
Right,
point.
right. That
Exactly that.
perseverance.
The point is that
Yeah.
you have to keep going. And I use myself as an example. I joined my first frat back when I was in college. I'm an Alpha Phi Alpha. And I went through in my master's program. And there weren't a lot of deaf people joining. And so I tried to make, some impact. I was, going through it. And the impact was different, because maybe the impact I thought I was making was different because someone else perceives your results differently than how you perceive them. Maybe they didn't see your struggles or what you went through to get to that point, but you know what you've been through. You know your struggles. A lot of people just see the successes, but you know what
Exactly.
you've been through. And so it's important to, you got to fight your own battles. You always have to. And sometimes the goal is that you have to, at the end of the day, you have to overcome those challenges. And so don't give up. Don't get discouraged. And as you're starting your business and you feel like you're falling, get back up, keep going. And lastly, please set up your network and get a strong one.
Yes. All of that. All of that. Yeah. And I would say, to add to that, I would say just don't start before you're ready. And they might mean that, you start later than you would like. I know for me, the first kind of chapter of my story was in the educational system, in the school system, which was a traumatizing period for me. And it was a very slow and lengthy process. What I didn't realize is that leaving that institution was really launched me on the second phase, the second chapter of my journey. And where I am now is has benefited so much from my prior experiences and the trauma that I did withstand. And so really my point is to make a plan, but make sure that you have a nice clean end to one chapter before you begin another, and understand take some time to understand what lessons were learned from that phase and take them into the second phase so that they can be something that helps you keep going. If it's really your dream to accomplish something, then everything that you're experiencing now is going to contribute to that success. You know, especially within the Black deaf community, there's so much love there. There's so much support, for you out there. You could see it here, and even the three of us, like you said, like Jazzy mentioned, we met at a great time. I mean, having this deaf ecosystem, and then with COVID and everything shifting online, it's like now we're being exposed to all of these different Black deaf businesses, and it's been really great. It's important that we continue to acknowledge our culture through music, dancing, rhythm. I mean, that's a big part of our culture too, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. When I look at Black deaf owned businesses, I really see how we're contributing to the culture, and we just continue to be creative and innovative. And so, I'll just end with this and say, whatever your job is, whatever your role is, really do it. Like, invest your time and your energy into it. Do it and do it well. And if you really have a dream and you just keep your mind and your heart behind it, you take care of yourself, make sure that you have a good well-being, you can do it. It's just that perseverance.
Amen. Amen.
Yes, and I'll follow up and say we have one question from the audience before we close out today. And it says, "Hi, I'm from Lafayette, LA. And the question is, what is your call to action for me? I'm a white female in a leadership role. And so I'm wondering, what is your call to action for me that is feasible to affect change?" And so that's a question that we received from the audience. So I'm wondering if you all, any one of you want to take up that question? Yes, this is a very important question. I'm glad that audience member asked that. So yeah, a lot of people who do have privilege, when we talk about white privilege, they wonder like, well, what do we do? We've learned that the system is broken. What do we do now? Well, the biggest thing is resistance. When we talk about specific topics within conversation with Black people, a lot of the times, especially when we talk about the educational context, we see that resistance. When we look at Black owned businesses, Black deaf owned businesses, Black lawyers, just Black people essentially in the workplace, in the workplace, there's often that kind of hesitant to trust because we feel like there's not that good foundation that has allowed Black people to be successful for all these years. And often when Black people are operating in a professional space, they're always questioned on their appearance, their dress, how their hair looks, if they have credentials, if they have the experience. And so all of that doubt and kind of hesitancy to conducting business with Black folks in this country um, is something that needs to be recognized and addressed and self-examined. Because if we fail to acknowledge it, then what we end up with is what we have now, a lack of Black people in leadership roles. And the product of that is not going to be a sustainable and equitable place. When we talk about education, I mean, the educational system has a huge impact on whether or not Black and Brown students are able to thrive. They need to be able to, in order for them to really achieve their dreams and to feel safe and secure, they're going to need that support from elementary on up. And so when we look at the predominant white culture, how we're showing up, how you're showing up in your work, how you're engaging with Black and Brown students, how you're revising and analyzing the policy that's already established, how you're interacting with Black and Brown families. It's important that that you have those conversations and that you recognize whenever every student deserves to graduate. Every student deserves to achieve their goals in life. And sometimes you're going to come across people with different cultures and different backgrounds, but you need to recognize when that encounter becomes one of resistance versus one of acceptance and listening and equitability. And this is Jazzy saying, yes, that was wonderful. I appreciate both of your time so much. That's the end of our webinar, run out of time. I'm so glad you were able to fit CSD Lunch and Learn into your schedule, Anne and Andrea. And I hope that this isn't the last time that you hear from me. I know I'll be reaching out. And for the audience members who are watching, don't be surprised if you get a random email from me about future Lunch and Learn sessions. So keep an eye out for that. And I appreciate, again, both of our panelists
No
here.
problem,
Everyone,
no
you have a great afternoon. Oh, and one thing before I wrap up, let me go ahead and get my lotion. I want to give homage to Nakia Smith, who's a deaf social media influencer. She does this before she signs off her TikToks and whatnot. So Black History Month is coming to a close. We talked about Black wealth, Black education, Black businesses, and also what it means to support Black people in the workplace. Something that I shared earlier this month was mentioning that one of the sources of employment for Black people is often in the federal government. The second most popular work profession where you can see Black folks is when Black people hire other Black people. And so that's where you see our pipelines the most. The second thing I'll say is use your dollars like a vote. I can't emphasize enough that when we look at the percentage of Black people who are likely to support a brand or a business that has the same values as them, that shares a belief system or even a political system, it's 37% of folks who feel that messaging of brands is empowering them and really embodies their beliefs. And so if we want to empower Black America, $1.4 trillion, again, $1.4 trillion is within circulation within the Black community. And so when we look at who has access to financial resources, who has the privilege of certain financial means, it's often white America, and Black folks are locked out of that. So your money is like a vote. Use your dollars like a vote. Make sure that how you're spend your money as a Black person is somewhere where you feel like the brand really represents you and respects you and shares, belief, political systems, or what have you. So that wraps up this month of February with our series. We will continue in March. We'll have weekly webinars, and we hope that you will join us again. I'll be passing on the crown, if you will, to my colleague, Roxanne Richards, who is going to be leading the March workshops. As you can see here listed on the slide, the days that they will occur. The first will be March 9th, and she will stay tuned to see what topics will be covered during those March webinars. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsors again. I want to thank all of the Black businesses for everything that they do and for taking the time to speak with us during these Lunch and Learn sessions. For the audience members, you will receive a survey from us. So please, if you could just take a few moments to complete that. We want to make sure that we continue to provide valuable resources for you all. So if you could just take a few moments to complete that survey, that would be great. And this is Jazzy. I'm signing off. You all have a